Hello and welcome. Over the last few years, I've been building a lot of CLIs and APIs using Crystal, and now that I'm building something new, I found myself into the need of building that a user interface, something that is beyond just a JSON API to that application. And while I started looking into options for that, I found there's a lot of different web frameworks for different needs and different functionality on Crystal. And they try to mimic frameworks from other languages in some cases. Others were completely different, but they're all bringing their own set of elements. They are too heavy for what I'm trying to do or for what I'm aiming to do. And I was wondering is if there's a way to do both things without going crazy about it. So one of my objectives was try to keep it simple, close to the metal, meaning minimal code, trying to use as much as possible of Crystal standard library if possible. Be framework agnostic because if for some reason the framework that I'm building on it's unmaintained or needs to be addressed to things, I need to figure out how to continue supporting it. And the bigger the framework, the bigger the challenge. And when you're by yourself, that's a little bit complicated. Then see the options like why I can't leverage on all the modern single page application SPA tooling out there, frameworks that can provide to be able to leverage on what the experts are good at. Front-end engineers have evolved, all the technologies and the browser capabilities evolve a lot, and why we cannot combine both, why we cannot combine the performance of Crystal, a compiled language, with the performance of a front-end integration and make it those work and collaborate. So my fourth point on that is make profit from it. But I've been thinking seriously on that, and I thought that perhaps the option for that will be to use something like Inertia. Inertia is a framework that allows you to do single page applications. So you can use all the single page application tooling frameworks like Vue, React, or Svelte, and then be able to use the framework or the backend that you want in order to be able to interface with it without having to build an API. So normally when you're building single page applications, the traditional approach is you have an API layer that's going to provide the data for the front end, for the client side framework, for Vue or React, and then on the server you will need to be providing that. And the problem with that approach is that you will be duplicating certain logic because your client side will need to perform certain validations, then send that information to the API. The API on your backend will need to be revalidating that data because now you exposed that API to the world. You will need to be doing certain type of validations and then sending that information back. So there's a bunch of duplication on that. Well, the inertia approach is a little more simpler. The inertia approach is you use the client-side framework, sure, but instead of sending responses as an API, you're sending a specific payloads of information that you can process in the front end and load it using the components of your framework. So normally this is how it works on the workflow. When a request is being sent, Inertia is going to send that as an AJAX request. The server is going to process that request and send back a JSON with all the information and all the properties necessary for them to instantiate the right component and show that information and update the browser history and so on. And then the front-end framework like Vue or React is going to display that information to the end user. How you build something like that for Crystal? Normally on Inertia you have existing framework integrations for Laravel, for Rails and others. And the good thing about that is that they define a protocol. They define how it's supposed to work. What are the expectations when you're doing a full page load, in a sense that it's not an inertia request. What you need to do when there is an inertia request. I've been prototyping a simple application just to demo this. I call it free jokes. That basically shows this. So I have a dashboard action that accepts accepts an HTTP context and some parameters that might be coming from the URL. And then it loads information from comedians and a jokes repository, because this is a type of application. It's just comedians and jokes. And then it renders the inertia render that passes the context in order to pass certain information or deduce certain information of the context. Then it passes the component that's going to be loaded. In this case, it's the component, the dashboard component, and then it passes certain properties to it. So it passes stats, which in this case is an array of elements that I pass a name, total, and delta to indicate some numbers, and etc. And then I have a counterpart of that, which is the view component on the front end that defines the properties I'm going to accept. So in this case, it's stats, it's an array. And then I have the template itself that's going to render this. So now I'm on the terminal and I'm going to boot up the application. Normally I develop everything within containers, and I will put a link to a previous recording where I show you more in detail about that. Now I just installed all the dependencies for my project. Installed the Crystal dependencies, but also installed the front-end dependencies that's going to use Bit.js and it's going to use Tailwind. Now I'm going to boot up the development server. So now that the application is running, it's running on port 8080, and actually already run the migrations. We created comedians and it created the jokes on the database. So let's go to the front end. So the first page that I land on is the dashboard that I was mentioning to you. And in this particular case, it has 0 comedians and 0 jokes. So what we're going to do, we're going to see that database. So I'm going to boot up here a console, and I'm going to do the seeding. So that populated some comedians and some jokes. If we refresh, that shows that. And now if I go to comedians, I see comedians. I can go to different pages, and I can go to jokes and to go to different pages. Nothing on that sounds out of extraordinary, right? That's like a normal application, and since I'm running on localhost, that's fast. But that's not the thing, what's happening. To pay attention to this, if I click on comedian, the request that's being performed is a AJAX request. It's not a regular page loaded request. And if we click inside, we'll find the payload. In this particular case, comedians was defined, but if I go back to dashboard, you will see the one that I showed before. That's going to show you all the stats that we sent over with all the information, and then whatever we decided to display here. If I go to comedians, it's exactly the same thing. If I go to the second page, I will say here, I will have different lists of comedians with different pagination information in the results. Now, if I click add a new comedian and I create comedian, I'm getting a validation error. But now the interesting part of those validation errors is that it's coming back from the backend. It's not being done by the front end. I can see here on the post request that the response to this contains some errors, indicating name is required and the specialty is required. And because we had those properties with errors, Inertia helpers for form submission is going to allow you to recover those errors, and then you can decide to display them whatever you want. So in this particular case, I can go and create a new comedian. So it's going to be Luis, and the specialty is going to be Crystal. Okay, now I have that comedian here. It posted that, and then it performed a redirect, but that redirect, it wasn't a full page load redirect indicating to that new location. It was an AJAX request and loaded the payload with the new element on the pagination. And I can come to this user, and on the edit, you will see that it's sending me all the information in order for me to edit. So let's see, my specialty is Crystal plus Ruby. And I will update the comedian. It performed the put request, sending that. And that put request, it sends over a redirect to see other. You get the list of comedians. I can show you how that action is. So the index action is not using any framework or any helper. It's just trying to do a bunch of stuff, very low level stuff. Definitely this is not for a final application because you have a lot of boilerplate code, but for the purposes of testing the inertia integration and how it's built, it serves that purpose. Now, Inertia itself, the code that runs this, the one that we have here to the render element that we send in the props and we send in the comedian, is really straightforward. So if I open up the Inertia source, here is the element. We have two parts of this. One is the renderer, that is part of your application, that we pass the render, that we accept the server context, the component string, and some props. And that performs the validation of the protocol. It checks that the request is an inertia request, and then if so, it will send the payload. It will send all the proper headers. If not, it will render a template, an HTML template that has the payload in order for your frontend to be all loaded once, and from there perform all the AJAX requests. So you have all that information there. But we'll also have this HTTP handler. This is a middleware that gets added into your HTTP stack in order to catch certain type of events that are associated with inertia in order to perform that 303, which is see other type of redirect when you're doing certain things. So if I show you the handler for that, it takes that on the deletes, patch, and put type of request, and only when you're doing 301 or 302 redirects is going to actually perform that see other type of request. So it's going to set the status see other, the 303, to perform a special redirect in the client side. It also has something really interesting called stale version check. That's going to check the version that you define it. So if we check the payloads here, it comes with a version, in this particular case is hard-coded to be number 1. But it could be changed to be something else. It could be the hash of the manifest and detects that there's a different change and is a get request. Is going to automatically say that you're stale, and it's going to perform a conflict, and it's going to reload 60 lines here and 60 lines here. So we're talking about under 200 lines of code to perform that implementation. There's stuff that needs to be implemented in order to have a complete implementation for Inertia, which is figuring out about prefetching, figuring out about deferred properties, partial reloads. I haven't implemented yet that I need to work on how to do those. But this is the idea. It's just an initial prototype showing the functionality and the possibility. And it's quite refreshing waiting for the compilation times of the HTML compiler within the Crystal application and a bunch of those things. If your application keeps growing, those compilation times are going to take longer. And if you need to wait for those things every single time, it's going to impact your developer experience. So well, that's it. This is so far what I haven't done. The idea of this is once this is in a better state, I will be sharing this and I will be releasing this as an open source project similar to the other associated with this. I hope that you enjoyed, that it piques your interest. Let me know in the comments. Have a great day. Bye.